Read us First Peter, chapter 16. For we were not making up clever stories when we told you about the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We saw his majestic splendor with our own eyes, and when he received honor and glory from the God, the Father, the voice from the majestic glory of God said to him, "This is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy." We ourselves heard that voice from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. And because of that experience, we have even greater confidence in the message proclaimed by the prophets. You must pay close attention to what they wrote, for your words are like a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and Christ, the morning star, shines in your hearts. Above all, you must realize that no prophecy in Scripture ever came from the prophet's own understanding or from human intelligence. No, those prophets were moved by the Holy Spirit and they spoke from God. Like a lamp shining in the dark. And so, Matthew Matthew 17 on my just find it. It's 17. Just had it. Let's see, 9. Let's see. that's not it. So it says, you must pay close attention to what they wrote for the words are like a lamp shining in a dark place. So, Genesis. "27. Reading. 27. On the way to I'm gonna try to read all of it. 27. So it says, and Jacob steals Esau's blessing. And one day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, and said, "My son, yes, father." Esau replied, "I am an old man now." Isaac said, "And I don't know when I may die. Take your bow, your bow, and your quiver, and full of arrows, and go out into the open to hunt some wild game." I already read that. Did I already read that? For me, prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die. Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, 'Bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal, and then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.' Now, my son, listen to me and do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine goats, and I will use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. And then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies." "But look," Jacob replied to Rebekah, "my brother Esau is a hairy man, and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I am trying to trick him, and then he'll curse me instead of blessing me." But his mother replied, "Then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goats for me." And so Jacob went out and got the golden goats for his mother. And Rebekah took them and prepared a delicious meal, just the way Isaac liked it. And then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her younger son Jacob. And she covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. And then she gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. So Jacob took the food to his father. "My father," he said. "Yes, my son." Isaac answered, "Who are you, Esau or Jacob?" Jacob replied, "It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me, and here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat it so you can give me your blessing." Isaac asked, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God put it in my path," Jacob replied. And then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you really are Esau." So Jacob went closer to his father, and Isaac touched him. And the voice is Jacob. The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's, Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy, like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. "But are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Jacob replied. And then Isaac said, "Now, my son, bring me the wild game and let me eat it, and then I will give you my blessing." So Jacob took the food to his father, and Isaac ate it, and he also drank the wine that Jacob served him. And then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come a little closer and kiss me, my son." So Jacob went over and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced of it. And he had blessed his son. And he said, "The smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. From the dew of heaven and the riches of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvest of grain and bountiful new wine." May many nations become your servants, and many they bow down to you. And may you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau returned from his hunt. Esau prepared a delicious meal and brought it to his father, and then he said, "Sit up, my father, and eat my wild game, so you can give me your blessing." But Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" And Esau replied, "It's your son, your firstborn son Esau." Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably and said, "Then who just served me wild game? I have already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came. And yes, that blessing must stand." When Esau heard his father's words, he let out a loud, bitter cry. "Oh, my father, what about me? Bless me too," he begged. But Isaac said, "Your brother was here and he tricked me. He has taken away your blessing." Esther exclaimed, "No wonder his name is Jacob, for now he has cheated me twice. And first he took my right as the firstborn, and now he has stolen my blessing. Oh, haven't you saved even one blessing for me?" Isaac said to Esau, "I have made Jacob your master, and I have declared that all his brothers will be his servants. I have guaranteed him as abundance of grain and wine. What is left for me to give you, my son?" Esau pleaded, "But do you really have only one blessing? Oh, my father, bless me too." And then Esau broke down and wept, and finally his father Isaac said to him, "You will live away from the richness of the earth, and away from the dew of the heaven above, and you will live by your sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you decide to break free, you will shake his yoke from your neck." Genesis chapter 28, verse 41. And from that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme, "I will soon be mourning my father's death, and then I will kill my brother Jacob." But Rebekah heard about Esau's plan, so she sent for Jacob and told him, "Listen, Esau is consoling himself by plotting to kill you. So listen carefully, my son. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay there with him until your brother cools off. And when he comes down and forgets what you have done to him, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I would rather die than see Jacob marry one of them." Genesis 27, Jacob cheats Esau, the commentary. Approximately 37 years had passed since the events of the previous chapter. Isaac is now 147, his sight has failed, and he thinks he is about to die, perhaps because his brother Ishmael had died at the age in Genesis 25 or 17. But he will live 43 more years. When Isaac craved some venting from Esau, promising the blessing in return, Rebekah plotted to deceive her husband and to get the blessing for Jacob, whom she loved. Her trickery was unnecessary because God had already promised the blessing to Jacob. Verse 25, verse 23 in Genesis. She cooked goat's meat so that it tasted like savory venison, and put the goat skin on Jacob's arms to impersonate the hairy Esau. Isaac made the mistake of trusting his feelings. The hairy arm felt like Esau's. We should not trust our emotional feelings in spiritual matters, as Martin Luther observed. Feelings come and feelings go, and feelings are deceiving. Our word is the word of God, naught else is worth believing. Although Rebekah planned the deception, Jacob was equally guilty for carrying it out, and he reaped what he sowed. C.H. Metatosser observed that whoever observes Jacob's life after he had superstitiously obtained his father's blessing or received that, he enjoyed very little worldly felicity, and his brothers sought to murder him, to avoid which he was forced to flee from his father's house. His uncle Laban deceived him, and he was obligated to leave him in a clandestine manner. He experienced the business of his son Reuben and the treachery and cruelty of Simon and Levi towards the Shemites, and then he had to feel the loss of his beloved wife. The supposed ultimately end of Joseph in the complete awe. He was forced by a famine to go into Egypt, and there he died in a strange land. Isaac blessed Jacob with prosperity, dominating, and protection. It is interesting that the blessings spoken by the patriots were prophetic, and it came to pass literally because, in a real sense, these men spoke by inspiration. And when Esther returned and learned of the deception, he sought the blessing tearfully, but the blessing had been granted to Jacob, and it couldn't be retracted. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16 or 17. However, Isaac did have a word for Esau as follows: Far from rich soil on earth shall you live, far from the dew of heaven on high. You shall live by the sword and serve your brother. But when he grow restive, his yoke shall break. This suggests that the Edomites would live in the desert places, would be warriors, and would be subject to the Israelites, but would one day rebel against this rule. And this latter prophecy was fulfilled in the reign of Joram, king of Judah, 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 20, verse 22. Esther planned to kill his brother Jacob as soon as his father would die, and the period of mourning would end. And when Rebekah learned of this, she told Jacob to head for her brother Laban's house in Haran, and she feared not only that Jacob would be killed, but that Esau would be on the way or be killed in a blood field, and she would lose her 2 sons at once. However, this explained Jacob's departure. To Isaac, she said she was afraid Jacob might marry a Hittite as Esau had done, and Jacob expected to return soon. But it was not to be for more than 20 years. His father would still be living, but his mother would have passed on. So I'm going to read 29 to 30 to 31. And Jacob 28. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him and said, You must not marry any of these Canaanite women. Instead, go at once to Paran, to the house of your grandfather Bethuel, and marry one of your uncle Laban's daughters. And may God Almighty bless you and give you many children, and may your descendants multiply and become many nations. May God pass on to you, your descendants, the blessings, the promise He promised to Abraham, and may you own this land where you are now living as a foreigner, for God gave this land to Abraham. So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Paran to stay with his uncle Laban and his mother brother and the son of Bethuel the Aramean. Esau knew that his father Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him to Paran to find a wife, and that he had warned Jacob, "You must not marry a Canaanite woman." He also knew that Jacob had obeyed his parents in going to Paran, and it was now very clear to Esau that his father did not like the local Canaanite woman. So Esau visited his uncle Ishmael's family and married one of Ishmael's daughters, in addition to the wives he already had. His new wife's name was Mahalah, and she was the sister of Nebiah and the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. Genesis 20, verse 10, Jacob's dream of Bethel. And meanwhile Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. And at sundown he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. And Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. And as he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to heaven. And he saw angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you're lying on belongs to you, and I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth." And they were spread out in all directions, to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What more am I with you? And I will protect you wherever you go. And one day I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I promised. Then Jacob awoke his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is this place, and I wasn't even aware of it." But he was also afraid and said, "What an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, in a very good way to heaven." The next morning, Jacob got up early, very early, and he took the stone and he had rested his head against, and he set it upright as a memorial pillow. And then he poured olive oil over it, and he named that place Bethel, which means the house of God, although it was previously called Luz. And then Jacob made this vow: "If God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I have set up will become a place for worshiping God, and I will present to God a tenth of everything he gives me." Genesis 29, Jacob arrives at Padan, and then Jacob hurried on finally, arriving in the land of the east, and he saw a well in the distance, and 3 flocks of sheep and goats laid in an open field beside it, waiting to be watered, but a heavy stone covered the mouth of the well. It was the custom there to wait for all the flocks to arrive before removing the stone and watering the animals. Afterward, the stone would be placed back over the mouth of the well. And Jacob went over to the shepherds and asked, "Where are you from, my friends?" "We are from Haran," they answered. "Do you know a man there named Laban, the grandson of Nerar?" he asked. "Yes, we do," they replied. "Is he doing well?" Jacob asked. "Yes, he's well," they answered. "Look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the flock now." Jacob said, "Look, it's still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals. Why don't you water the sheep and goats so they can get back out to the pasture?" "We can't water the animals until all the flocks have arrived," and they replied. Then the shepherds moved the stone from the mouth of the well, and we watered all the sheep and goats. Jacob was still talking with them when Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherd. And because Rachel was his cousin, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and because the sheep and goats belonged to his uncle Laban, Jacob went over to the well and moved the stone from its mouth and watered his uncle's flock. And then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he wept out loud. He explained to Rachel that he was her cousin on her father's side, and the son of her aunt Rebekah. So Rachel quickly ran and told her father Laban. And as soon as Laban heard about his nephew, Jacob, had arrived, he ran out to meet him. He embraced and kissed him and brought him home. And when Jacob had told him his story, Laban exclaimed, "You really are my own flesh and blood." Genesis 29, verse, I don't know, 15. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. So after Jacob had stayed with Laban for about a month, Laban said to him, "You shouldn't work for me without pay just because we are relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be." And now Laban had 2 daughters, and the older daughter was Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. And there was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. And since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, "I will work for you for her 7 years if you will give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife." "Agree," Laban replied. "I'd rather give her to you than to anyone else. Stay and work with me." So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. And finally the time came for him to marry her. "I have fulfilled my agreement," Jacob said to Laban. "Now give me my wife so I can sleep with her." So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night, when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. And Laban had given Leah a servant Zilpah to be her maid. But when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah. "What have you done to me?" Jacob raged at Laban. "I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me?" "It's not our custom here to marry a younger daughter as the head of the firstborn," Laban replied. "But wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel, so provided you promise to work another 7 years for me." So Jacob agreed to work the 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave Rachel a servant Bilhah to be her maid. And so Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. And he then stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. Jacob's many children. And when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children. But Rachel could not conceive. So Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me." And she soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son, and she named him Simeon. For she said, "The Lord heard what was unloved, and has given me another son." And then she became pregnant a third time and gave birth to another son. He was named Levi, for she said, "Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons." And once again Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son, and she named him Judah, for she said, "Now I will praise the Lord." And then she stopped having children. Genesis 30. And when Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister, and she pleaded with Jacob, "Give me children, or I will die." And then Jacob became furious with Rachel. "And my God," he asked, he says, "the one who have kept you from having children." And then Rachel told him, "Take my maid Bilhah and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too." So Rachel gave her Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan, for she said, "God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son." And then Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a second son. And Rachel named him Naphtali, for she said, I have struggled hard with my sister and I'm winning. Meanwhile, Leah realized that she wasn't getting pregnant anymore, so she took her servant Zipporah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And soon Zipporah presented with him a son. And Leah named him Gad, for she said, how fortunate I am. Then Zipporah had Jacob a second son, and Leah named him Asher, for she said, what a joy is mine. Now the other woman will celebrate with me. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel begged, Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? And now you will steal my son's mandrakes too? Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes. So that evening, as Jacob was coming home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. You must come and sleep with me tonight. She said, I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. So that night, he slept with Leah. And God answered Leah's prayer. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a fifth son for Jacob. And she named him Israel. For she said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to her sixth son for Jacob, and she named him Zebulun. For she said, God has given me a good reward now. My husband will treat me with respect, for I have given him six sons. And later she gave birth to her daughter named her Dinah. And then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and God removed my disgrace. And she named him Joseph, for she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. Jacob's wealth increases. Soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, please release me so I can go home to my own country. Let me take my wives and children, for I have earned them by serving you, and let me be on my way. You certainly know how hard I work for you. Please listen to me, Laban replied. I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you. Whatever it is, I'll pay you. Jacob replied, you know how hard I work for you, and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care, and you had little indeed before I came. But your wealth has increased enormously, and the Lord has blessed you through everything I've done. But now, what about me? When can I start providing for my own family? What wages do you want, Laban asked. Jacob replied, don't give me anything. Just do this one thing, and I will continue to tend and watch over your flocks. Let me inspect your flocks today and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep, and give these to me as my wages. In the future, when you check on the animals you have given me as my wages, you'll see that I have been honest. If you find in my flock any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I have stolen them from you. All right, Laban replied, it will be as you say. But that very day Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. And meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took some fresh branches from the poplar, almond, and plane trees, and peeled off strips of bark, making white streaks on them. And then he placed them peeled branches in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, for that was where they mated. And when they mated in front of the white streaked branches, they gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flock. And at mating time, he turned the flock to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black. This is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's. And whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering churros in front of them, and then they would mate in front of the branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones, so the weaker lands belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. And as a result, Jacob became very wealthy, with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants and male camels and donkeys. So I'm in 31, Genesis 31, Jacob flees from Laban. But Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. Jacob has robbed our father of everything, they said. He has gained all his wealth at our father's expense. And Jacob began to notice a change in Laban's attitude toward him. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. So Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where he was watching his flock. He said to them, I have noticed that your father's attitude toward me has changed, but the God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I work for your father, but he has cheated me, changing my wages 10 times. But God has not allowed him to do me any harm. For if he said, the speckled animals will be your wages, the whole flock began to produce speckled young. And when he changed his mind and said, the strip animals will be your wages, then the whole flock produced strip young. In this way, God has taken your father's animals and given them to me. And one time during the mating season, I had a dream and saw that the male goats mating with the females were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And then in my dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I replied, yes, here I am. The angel said, look up and you will see that only the streaked and speckled and spotted males are mating with the females of your flock. For I have seen how Laban has treated you. I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, in a place where you are anointed, the pillar of the stone, and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth. Rachel and Leah responded, that's fine with us. We won't inherit any of our father's wealth anyway. He has reduced our rights to those of foreign women. And after he sold us, he wasted the money you paid him for us. All the wealth God has given you from our father legally belongs to us and our children. So go ahead and do whatever God has told you. So Jacob put his wives and children on camels, and he drove all his livestock in front of him, and he packed all the belongings he had acquired in Padan, and set out for the land of Canaan, where his father Isaac lived. At that time they lived Beth. Laban was some distance away, shearing his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household idols and took them with her. Jacob outwitted Laban the Aramean, for he set out in security and never told Laban they were leaving. So Jacob took all his possessions with him and crossed the Euphrates River and heading for the hill country of Gilead. Genesis 31, verse 32. So 3 days later, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he gathered a group of his relatives and set out in hot pursuit, and he caught up with Jacob 7 days later in the hill country of Gilead. But the previous night God had appeared to Laban the Aramean in a dream, told him, I'm warning you, leave Jacob alone. Laban caught up with Jacob as he was camped in the hill country of Gilead, and he set up his camp not far from Jacob's. What do you mean by deceiving me like this? Laban demanded. How dare you drag my daughters away like prisoners of war? Why did you slip away secretly, and why did you deceive me? And why didn't you say you wanted to leave? I would have given you a farewell feast with singing and music, accompanied by tamarines and harps. Why didn't you let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren and tell them goodbye? You have acted very foolishly, and I could destroy you, but the God of your father appeared to me last night and warned me, leave Jacob alone. I can't understand your feeling that you must go in your intense longing for your father's home, but why have you stolen my gods? I rushed away because I was afraid, Jacob answered. I thought you would take your daughters from me by force, but as for your gods, see if you can find them, and let the person who has taken them die. And if you find anything else that belongs to you, identify it before all these relatives of ours, and I will give it back. But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the household idols. And then Laban went first into Jacob's tent to search for them, and Leah's, and then the tents of 2 servant wives, but he found nothing. And finally he went into Rachel's tent, but Rachel had taken the household idols and hidden them in her camel saddle. And now she was sitting on them, and when Laban had freely searched for her tent, without finding them, she said to her father, please, sir, forgive me if I don't get up for you. I am having my monthly period. So Laban continued his search, but he could not find the household idols. Then Jacob became very angry, and he challenged Laban. What's my crime? He demanded. What have I done wrong to make you chase after me as though I were a criminal? You have rummaged through everything I own. Now show me what you have found that belongs to you. Set it out here in front of us, before our relatives, for all to see, and let them judge between us. For 20 years I have been with you, caring for your flocks, and all that time you used your sheep and goats and never miscarried. In all those years, I never used a single ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, I never showed you the carcass and asked you to reduce the count of your flock. No, I took the loss for myself, and you made me pay for every stolen animal, whether it was taken in broad daylight or in the dark of night. I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through cold and sleepless nights. And yes, for 20 years I slaved in your house, and I worked for 14 years, earning your 2 daughters and the 6 more years for your flock. And you changed my wages 10 times. In fact, if God and my father had not been on my side, the God of Abraham and the fearsome God of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen your abuse in my hard work. That is why he appeared to you last night and rebuked you. Genesis 31 and 43. Jacob's treaty with Laban. Then Laban replied to Jacob, these women are my daughters, these children are my grandchildren, and these flocks are my flocks. In fact, everything you see is mine. But what can I do now about my daughters and their children? So come, let's make a covenant, you and I, and there will be a witness to our commitment. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument. And then he told his family members, gather some stones. So they gathered stones and piled them in a heap. And then Jacob and Laban sat down beside the pile of stones to eat a covenant meal. And to commemorate the event, Laban called the place Jegar, which means witness, pile in Arabic. And Jacob called it Gilead, which means witness, pile in Hebrew. And then Laban declared this pile of stones or stand as a witness to remind us of a covenant we have made today. This explains why it is called Gilead, witness Pal, but it was also called the Mizpah, which means watchtower, for Laban said, "May the Lord keep watch between us to make sure that we keep this covenant when we are out of each other's sight. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you marry other wives, God will see it, even if no one else does. He is a witness to this covenant between us. See this pile of stones," Laban continued, "and see this monument. I have set this between us, and they stand between us as witness of our vows, and I will never pass this pile of stones to harm you, and you must never pass these stones or this monument to harm me. I call on the God of our ancestors, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of my grandfather Terah, to serve as a judge between us." So Jacob took an oath before the fearsome God of his father Isaac to respect the boundary line. And then Jacob offered a sacrifice to God there on the monument, the mountain, and invited everyone to a covenant feast. After they had eaten, they spent the night on the mountain, and Laban got up early the next morning, and he kissed his grandchildren and his daughter and blessed them, and then he left and returned home. So there's some here. Commentary. Jacob, his wives, and his offspring. Genesis chapter 29, 1:30, verse 24. Jacob was 77 years. Jacob was 77 when he left Beersheba for Haran, and he would spend 20 years serving his uncle Laban, 33 years back in Canaan, and in the last 17 years of his life in Egypt, arriving in Paran, and he was guided to the very field where some shepherds from Haran were tending their flocks. So perfect was God's timing that Rachel was just arriving with her flocks when Jacob was talking with the shepherds. And being a good shepherd, Jacob wondered why they were all waiting at the well when there was still daylight for feeding the sheep. They explained that they did not remove the cover from the well until all the herds had arrived. It was an emotion-packed moment for Jacob when he met his cousin Rachel, and for Laban a short while later when he met his nephew Jacob. Laban agreed to give Rachel to Jacob in exchange for 7 years of service. The years seemed to Jacob but a few days because of the love he had for Rachel, her, and that is how it should be in our service for the Lord. Leah was weak-eyed and not attractive. Rachel was beautiful. According to custom, it was arranged that the bride should go into the groom on the wedding night, veiled, and perhaps with the room was in darkness. You can imagine how irritated Jacob was in the morning when he found out that his bride was Leah, and Laban had tricked him, but excused the trick of the ground that the older daughter should be married first, according to the local custom. Then Laban said, "Fulfill her week. That is carried through on the marriage to Leah, and we will give you this one also, Rachel, for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. At the end of the week, week-long wedding feast. Jacob also married Rachel, then served 7 more years for her. Jacob had sown the seed, and now he was reaping it. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, that is loved less than Rachel, he compensated for this by giving her children. This law of divine compensation still operates, and people who lack in one area are given extra in another. Leah acknowledged the Lord when she named her children. Verse 32, 33, and 35. From her comes the priesthood Levi, the royal line of Judah, and ultimately Christ. In the chapter, we have the first 4 of the sons of Jacob. The complete list of Jacob's sons is as follows. The sons are born to Leah: Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Israel, and Zebulun. See a son, hearing, join, praise, hire, dwelling. Reuben, see a son, Simon, hearing, and Levi, join, and Judah, praise, and Israel, hire, and Zebulun, dwelling. The sons born to Bilhah, the handmaid of Rachel, Dan, judge. Natively resting in, and the sons born to Zipporah, handmaid of Leah, God, a troop of good fortune. Asher, happy. The sons born to Rachel, Joshua, adding, and Benjamin, son of the right hand. In desperation, have a child playing on her knees. Rachel gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob as a wife or concubine. Even though such arrangements were common in those days, they were contrary to God's will. Bilhah bore 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone by Rachel, Leah gave her maid Zipporah to Jacob, and 2 more sons were born, Gad and Asher. The mandrakes which Reuben found were a sort of love apple, believed by them superstitious and part fertility. Since Rachel was barren, she was anxious to have some of the mandrakes. In change, she agreed to let Leah live as wife with Jacob for some unexplained reason. Leah had apparently lost her privileges as wife. After this, 2 more sons were born to Leah, Israel and Zebulun, and also a daughter, Dinah. At last, Rachel bore her first son and named him Joseph, expressing faith that God would give her still another son. When Jacob told Laban that he wanted to return home to Canaan, his uncle urged him to stay, and Laban said that he had learned by experience that the Lord has blessed him because of Jacob, and would meet his wage demands if he would stay. Jacob agreed to continue serving if Laban would give him all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats and all the dark lambs. All other animals in the flock would be acknowledged as Laban's. The latter agreed to the pact, saying, "Oh, that is where, according to your word." Laban took most of the animals designated for Jacob and gave them to his sons to shepherd, realizing that they would probably be reduced with markings. He identified them as belongings to Jacob. Then he entrusted his own animals to Jacob, separating from his own sons by a 3-day journey, and this made it possible for the marked animals in the herds tended by Laban's sons to breed with Laban's unmarked animals that were tended by Jacob. When breeding, Laban heard Jacob put rods that he had peeled in front of them, whether they were of solid color or marked. The lambs or kids were born streaked, speckled, and spotted, and this of course meant that they belonged to Jacob. Did these rods actually determine the markings of the animals? There may or may not have been a significant basis to the method. The genetic evidence suggests that there may have been. How else might the animals have been born with the markings Jacob desired? First of all, it may have been a miracle, or it may have been a clever trick on Jacob's part. There are indications in the narrative that he knew the science of selective breeding. By carefully breeding, he not only produced animals with the markings he desired, but he was also able to produce stronger animals for himself and feeble ones for Laban. Perhaps the peeled rods were just a trick to hide his breeding secrets from others. Whatever the explanation, Jacob's wealth increased during his final 6 years of serving Laban. So after Jacob discovered that Laban had and his sons were growing jealous and resentful, the Lord told him that the time had come to return to Canaan. First, he called Rachel and Leah and discussed the matter, rehearsing how Laban had cheated him and changed his wages 10 times, how God has overruled so that the flocks away always bred in his favor, how God has reminded him of the vow he had made 20 years earlier, and how the Lord had told them to return to Canaan. His wives agreed that their father had not dealt honestly and that they should leave. The Griff Thomas points out several interesting principles for discerning God's guidance here. First, Jacob had a desire. In Genesis 40, verse 25. Secondly, circumstances necessary, a change of sort. And necessary a change of some sort. Thirdly, God's word came strongly to him. And finally, there was confirming support from his wives, despite their natural ties to Laban. And note that the angel of God is the God of Bethel. Before the secret departure, Rachel stole her father's household idols and hid them in her camel saddle. Possession of these household gods implied leadership of the family, and in the case of a married daughter, assured her husband the right of the father's property. And since Laban had sons of his own, when Jacob fled to Canaan, they alone had the right to their father's territory. Rachel's theft was therefore a serious matter aimed at preserving for her husband the chief title to Laban's estate. When Laban learned of the departure, he and his men persuaded him for 7 days' journey, but the Lord warned him in a dream not to trouble Jacob and his caravan. And when he finally overtook them, he only complained that he had been denied the privilege of giving them a royal send off, and that his idols had been stolen. To the first complaint, Jacob answered that he left secretly for fear that Laban take his daughters Rachel and Leah from him by force. And to the second complaint, he denied having stolen the gods and rashly decreed death for the culprit. Laban made a free search of the caravan, but in vain. Rachel was sitting on them and excused herself for not getting off the camel saddle to honor her father because it was her menstrual period, or so she said. And now it was Jacob's turn to be angry. He denounced Laban for accusing him of theft and for treating him so unfairly for 20 years, in spite of Jacob's faithful and generous service. This passage reveals that Jacob was a hard worker and that the blessing of the Lord was upon him in all that he did. Are we faithful to our pluralists? Does the blessing of God rest upon our work? Avoided the issue by lamely protesting that he would not harm his own daughters and grandchildren or cattle, then suggested that they should make a pact. It was not a gracious, friendly covenant asking the Lord to watch over them while they were separated. Rather, it was a compact between two cheats, asking the Lord to make sure that they did what was right when they were out of sight from one another. It was in effect a non-aggression treaty, but it also charged Jacob not to treat Laban's daughters harshly nor to marry other wives. Laban called the pillar of the stones marking the pact Jerkar, a Arabic expression. Jacob called it Galilee, a Hebrew word. Both words mean the heap of witness. Neither man was to pass the stone heap to attack the other. Laban swore by God of Abraham, not God of Noram, and the God of their father, Terah, the capital Elizabethism of God in the New King James Version, also Mephat, NIV, etc., indicates that the translators felt Laban was referring to the one true God that Abraham came to know. However, since the Hebrew does not have upper and lower case letters, we can't tell if Laban might have been referring to the pagan gods which these men had worshipped in Gerar. Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, that is the God whom Isaac feared. Isaac had never been an idolater. Jacob first offered the sacrifice and made a banquet for all those present and camped all the night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and daughters goodbye and left for home. Okay, I'm gonna go to bed. Wherever you're watching, I don't know. Alright.